So, to start off with, unions are really important. Over the past 2 centuries, organized labor has improved the lives of working-class people worldwide. The labor movement brought an end to exploitative child labor, won higher pay, and gave us the 40-hour workweek and the weekend. But as attacks on organized labor from business and government have increased in the past 30 years,
and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
A lower and lower percentage of the American workforce is unionized. Pay has stagnated, benefits have been gutted, more and more wealth has gone to executives and CEOs rather than workers. And right now, many American workers have no idea that unions should help solve these problems, because most Americans don't have personal experience with unions. In fact, many people might only learn about unions from the media. So, what are they learning? Well, we have some data on how newspapers and broadcasts generally treat labor issues. When they're covered at all, news coverage tends to focus mostly on strikes and the negative effects of strikes.
Thousands of parents in the lurch. Janice Thompson scrambled to rearrange her schedule to pick her twins up early. The strike, combined with the city's soaring murder rate, is what most bothers her.
Out of 386 labor-related Tribune stories published between 1991 and 2001, researchers found that 77% of the descriptors used to signify organized labor were negative. Often, people in unions are not even interviewed, meaning the perspective of the workers and the contract they are trying to win is lost entirely. However, for this video, I'm more interested in scripted portrayals of labor. After all, it's easy to roll your eyes at an anti-labor story on Fox News, or giggle at those corny union-busting videos made by major companies.
With what we have here, I'm not willing to trade it for a union that doesn't know anything about me or my goals.
But it's harder to notice bad messages and negative stereotypes in that movie or TV show you love, or like, or have on in the background while you fold towels.
But I'm not unskilled, I'm in the union.
So let's take a look at labor in the last 120 years of film and television. So when the moving pictures were first invented, several companies immediately saw a new way to advertise. After all, why print ads on newspapers or on the side of a wall where people could look at them for free, when people could pay to see a wondrous new technology that just happens to tell them to smoke your cigarettes? One of the first companies to invest was the National Association of Manufacturers, who had a clear interest in tamping down on the budding labor movement. From 1907 to 1911, they released several shorts with titles like The Lawn Strike, The Riot, Good Boss, and Lazy Bill and the Strikers. Jeez. Over time, several other production companies jumped on the anti-union train. For example, this early film from Disney features an eggplant that's unionized by a sinister Russian chicken, complete with an evil goatee. Really subtle, Walt. However, several international films highlighting the struggles of workers in the industrial age had releases in the US. And as the Great Depression brought labor issues to the forefront of American culture, more and more films were released that were sympathetic to the working class. Even Citizen Kane, the #greatest film ever made, has the protagonist's downfall begin with him turning his back on working people he used to fight for.
You talk about the people as though you own them, as though they belong to you. Goodness. As long as I can remember, you've talked about giving the people their rights, as if you could make them a present of liberty. You used to write an awful lot about the working man.
Oh, go on
He's turning
home.
into something called organized labor. You're not going to like that one little bit when you find out it means that your working man expects something as his right, not as your gift.
So, for a while, it was a mixed bag.
Yeah, but we're organized. Amalgamated Association of Morons. Local 6 and 7/8.
There were positive portrayals of labor, there were negative ones, and there were some that tried to have it both ways. However, after World War II, when relations between the US and the Soviet Union started to sour, things took a turn for the worse very quickly. Film studio producers had long contested that strikes and labor struggles were the result of foreign communist agitation instead of low pay and bad working conditions. And as the Red Scare began to take hold, more and more people began to listen to these producers. Hello again, Walt.
Call them all a bunch of communists, and I believe they are.
People began to suspect filmmakers of subversive activities. In 1945, Mississippi Congressman John E. Rankin, seen here wishing he was Moses, held a press conference to declare that one of the most dangerous plots ever instigated for the overthrow of this government has its headquarters in Hollywood, the greatest hotbed of subversive activities in the United States. On July 29, 1946, William R. Wilkerson, publisher and founder of The Hollywood Reporter, published a trade view column entitled A Vote for Joe Stalin. It listed 11 people in the film industry as communist sympathizers. Wilkerson began to publish more and more names on more and more lists, and eventually the House of Un-American Activities Committee in Congress began to take notice. In October 1947, they began to subpoena filmmakers.
If I had my way about it, they'd all be sent back to Russia or some other unpleasant place.
People were jailed, people lost work, people's lives were ruined, and the content of scripts began to be closely watched.
Never observed any communistic information in any scripts. Well, I have turned down quite a few scripts because I thought they were tinged with communistic ideas.
Studios would not touch anything remotely pro-union or pro-worker. Releasing a film that celebrated the victories of organized labor would get you in front of government investigators quickly. In fact, to prove their loyalty to the US government, many studios began to release anti-union propaganda. 1951's I Was a Communist for the FBI shows union leaders as violent, racist opportunists who report directly to Moscow.
Thanks. Those ate it up, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. You mean Negroes, don't you, Jim?
Only when I'm trying to sell them the party line.
Oh no, he's a racist. No patriotic American in the 1950s would ever be a racist. Perhaps the easiest way to define the era is to look at two films released in 1954, Salt of the Earth and On the Waterfront. Salt of the Earth shows the story of Esperanza Quintero, a woman who lives in an oppressive mining company town. She leads a strike against the company and wins a contract for the workers. It was based on real events, and it's really cool to see a film from this time with a Mexican-American female lead who stands up for her community and wins. The movie was produced by the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers. Many of the people who worked on the film had been blacklisted from mainstream work. The film's production was absolute hell. The press denounced the film as a communist plot. Anti-communist vigilantes fired rifle shots at the set. The film's leading lady was deported to Mexico. Eventually, the movie had to be edited in secret and was stored for safekeeping in an anonymous wooden shack in Los Angeles. When it finally was released, all of the reviews called it propaganda, and it was only released in 12 theaters nationwide. Now let's take a look at On the Waterfront. On the Waterfront was based on a screenplay called The Hook by Arthur Miller. The original script was about workers joining together to retake their union. Elia Kazan, who had famously been called before the House of Un-American Activities Committee in 1952 and had sold out several fellow film industry workers by giving the committee their names, signed on to direct. They met with Harry Kahn at Columbia Pictures. He wanted to produce, but he wanted a couple of major script changes. Primarily, he wanted the villains of the film to be explicit communists. Arthur Miller absolutely refused to do this. However, he then received a nasty telegram from Kahn reading, "It's interesting how the minute we try to make the script pro-American, you pull out." Miller dropped out of the film, and the whole affair served as partial inspiration for The Crucible, the famous metaphor for McCarthyism that every single American watching read the Spark Notes for in high school. Kazan began to rewrite the script with Bud Schulberg. Schulberg was hesitant to take on the project because, in his words, who's going to care about a bunch of sweaty longshoremen? Truly a working-class hero. The final result of all of this is a film that portrays a union completely corrupt and completely controlled by the mob. The movie does show some sympathy for workers and work stoppages, but instead of trying to take back the union or fight for democratic control, like in the original script, they kind of just push the villain into the water. Like, that's it. Not really a permanent solution, guys. Also, funnily enough, Marlon Brando's protagonist, Terry Malloy, becomes a hero by testifying to authorities. So Kazan essentially turned this script into self-insert fanfiction with himself as the hero by valiantly naming names. On the Waterfront completely rejects the idea that unions to be a way for working class people to build power. It was massively popular. It swept the Academy Awards in 1954. It is regularly listed as one of the greatest films of all time. In contrast, Salt of the Earth was boycotted by the American Legion, investigated by the FBI, and denounced on the floor of Congress. It's gotten a little more recognition in recent years, but it's mostly been forgotten. In the 70 years since these two films, portrayals of unions have mostly been, well...
It's trade unionism. It's as American as apple pie.
It's Slavic.
Not great?
Incredible bomb threat against one of your schools.
Bomb threats are a serious matter, but union lawyers are more serious.
Awful.
Wake up, you little scab!
Timmy?
We got a message for you from the union.
I initially was going to try to tackle this chronologically, but this video was getting a bit unwieldy, and I needed to figure out how to pare this down a bit.
Can you believe these trash bozos? They make $20 an hour, and they want more.
So I'm dividing this into 2 different episodes. I'll see you back next time, and we'll talk about the horrors of the past 70 years.